Hi there and welcome to Central Texas Gardener. I'm Tom Spencer. I really like the contrast between dynamic spiky forms when they're set against softer plant renditions. Today, designer Patrick Kirwin shows off some of his favorite selections for majestic presence in your garden. On tour, we visit a garden of contrast in high shade.
Walt Kruger found serenity, as he's named his garden, after hauling tons of stones to frame his backyard in new levels of plant exploration. When his friend Renee Lake drafted his garden for an Austin Organic Gardeners tour, he met Elaine Dill, a fellow organic gardener.
We're both plantaholics, so it was just, perfect. So we go on trips together, we egg each other on to try new things, and Walt's got such an experimental area out here, lots of places to put things, so I can make him buy things that I like that he can try out here.
As an experienced gardener, Elaine recognized the work and innovation that Walt put into his once flat backyard.
Walt lived out here for a long time before he started gardening. It was mainly lawn. And when he decided to make a garden out of it, it had to be rocked in so that the deer wouldn't get in. And then he had envisioned the different layers going up the hill and hauled in 80 tons of rock. This is all since 2000. Hauled it all in by wheelbarrow, by hand, laid it all himself, did all the rock work. So I don't know how many linear feet of pathway he has back here, but it's a lot of rock and a lot of soil.
One of Walt's challenges was working mainly in shade.
Things that you read in the books, even for Central Texas, and they tell you it needs full sun or at least a half a day sun, and it just seems to have such a different texture or a different shape growing in the shade. It can be much more delicate. A number of the bauhinias, you can really see the texture of the limbs and how they kind of contort themselves in the shade more than they would in the sun, and just a very different effect.
With sensitive planting, Walt takes advantage of his pockets of sunlight or its penetrating shafts. Along with this stonework, he used multiple varieties of boxwood and other evergreens for permanent structure. Then he added perennial charm to renew the perspective in each season. Floppy plants also counterpoint the more stalwart guides, inviting another step to see what's going on. Walt varies the experience with strong players against softer textures. On each level, he added other incentives to linger. All paths lead to Walt's Japanese garden.
He's always been very interested in Zen gardening, and you can see that the Zen technique flows throughout the garden. He'll trim the trees up so that you really see the structural bones of each tree. And he plants things mainly in 3s or 5s, odd numbers for good energy flow. And it also, you can see it reflected in the plants. They just seem to be happy to grow in small groups. And the Japanese technique just seems to keep an order in the garden and helps that peaceful feeling that you see. It just gives you a sense of completeness.
Renee painted stones with messages to reflect Walt's intention.
I think serenity is the perfect name for this garden. You could just live out here if you wanted to, and with the birds, and as long as you're not listening to the airplane noises, they seem to fade away even when you're in the garden. It's just very peaceful wherever you look. To come sit in Walt's garden for a few minutes, and you might come after work and you're feeling really stressed out through your commute, and you can just come sit back here and you just lose all your cares. It's just very peaceful, very beautiful. And the little Japanese signs just kind of remind you, just take a look around and let the rest of your day go.
Hi there and welcome. We're now joined by Patrick Kirwin, who's a garden designer, and he's going to be sharing some information about some really cool sculptural plants that are going to be hardy for sun and shade here in the Austin area. And it's great to have you back on the program, Patrick.
Thanks for having me back, Tom. Appreciate it.
Well, it's always fun to visit about plants I don't know much about. That's one of my favorite things about the show is I get to learn so much when I'm doing the interviews. And you've brought a selection of plants that I really like. I'm like a lot of other gardeners out there, I like really bold sculptural things. And the plants that you brought today are plants that will work in that kind of way, but they'll work in sun and shade, which is something you don't often find.
Right. It's really hard to get those kind of textures, especially the blues and the maroons in a shady environment where you can actually see the sculpture of the plant as opposed to just kind of a green blob.
Exactly.
So we've got a few different color forms and different shapes and different flowering mechanisms. So there's all kinds of neat stuff here.
Well, there's palms, agaves, dyckias, and dioons. So we have a wide variety of things to talk about. We're going to start off with talking about a plant that I'm not very familiar with. This is a Florida native, I understand.
Florida native.
Called needle palm.
Needle palm. And at the base of the plant, it has, very large needles that point up.
Well defended.
Well defended, and it's from the Florida Panhandle, and it grows naturally on limestone, so it works well here in Austin.
Great.
And it's also one of the more cold hardy palms that you'll find. So this will grow in Dallas and Amarillo and all the way through Texas.
Yeah,
so,
and when we were preparing for the interview, you told me that they even use this in the Midwest.
Yeah. I mean, this is an extremely cold hardy palm, and it's slow growing, so there is a little bit of patience needed, but it's very cold hardy.
So, and my understanding is this is a compact form, forms clumps. How big does it get here?
Here it would probably get about 5 by 5, maybe 7 by 7. If it's in a really happy spot. But in Florida, it obviously gets a lot more rainfall than we do here. If it's under irrigation, it'll maybe get more towards the 7 by 7, but it's going to be slow.
Well, I always like the clumping palms because they're not going to get out of hand, and that looks like a good one. Right next to it, we have another variety, and I love this one because it has that kind of silvery sheen on the leaf.
It's a really nice palm, and they're just coming into the trade in the last few years. So Florida's had a little bit of a jump on us in getting them into nursery production, but
and the name of this one is well, it's Mediterranean fan palm, but we're calling it the blue form of that, right?
Right. It's the blue Mediterranean fan palm. Some debate on the species versus variety, but
yeah, it's always happening in the plant world.
Yeah. We got to keep the taxonomists happy. But this is a really beautiful color, kind of a blue jean blue. And in the sun, it stays a little bit compact, and in the shade, it gets a little bit stretchy. The petioles kind of stretch out a little bit.
That sounds great.
But a nice shimmer in the wind. Just a really beautiful color for a shady environment.
Well, certainly one that would pop out compared to a standard green. And again, similar form to the one we just talked about, the needle palm. It forms a clump. Doesn't get too big.
Correct.
Yeah.
5 by 5 here, 7 by 7 if it's really happy.
Okay, so another great choice. Love the color. Crazy about anything that has that kind of blue cast to it in the garden. The next one we're going to be talking about is one called Mazzari palm.
Right.
And this is a desert species, I understand. And that seems odd. Palms and desert.
It's kind of a contradiction, but this is a Middle Eastern palm.
Oasis, perhaps?
Close to oasis, but will, once established, be very, very drought tolerant. Once was used as a crop out in West Texas. It was experimented with as a dryland crop for its fruit. And this is the green form. It also comes in a blue jean blue type color. Cool. And very, very tough. You know, definitely suited for Austin's environment, and extremely cold hardy too.
So I mean, if it will survive in West Texas and produces a fruit, has a cool form, this is a winner.
Yeah, this is another kind of clump forming palm. Sometimes they'll get a little bit of a trunk, but not terribly tall like a sabal or something.
Sure. Well, I like the sound of all of the things that you described there, and we need more plants that produce fruit, I think. And people are hungry, literally, to include more of that in their garden. I know that I am. The next plant, we're going to jump from the palms now to an agave that does great in the shade. And there are several species of agave that do. This is one called agave bracteosa, but I understand this is a special form of agave bracteosa.
Right. This was found by Pat McNeil, a local nurseryman, and he put it into the tissue culture lab and has gotten, you know, lots of them, so they're available for sale.
Right.
They do come in smaller sizes. I chose this one just so you could see, you know, almost a full-size one, and to see the form of it. But what's really nice about this agave is there's no spines on the edges, and there's no pointy parts at the ends of the tips. So it's a very soft agave, and you know, you could put it in a more high traffic area in the shade than you would opposed to another type.
Exactly. Well, it's not quite as dangerous, that's for sure, as the other agaves. Now, one of the things about this, the Calamar version of agave bracteosa that we have here today is that this doesn't offset as much as the other regular agave bracteosa.
Correct.
And there's a real advantage to that for some gardeners, at least my perspective on this particular plant.
Yeah, I mean, the Calamar actually looks really great in a pot as a specimen plant. And you, like you said, you don't get all the little pups coming out of the bottom that you have to work with.
Right.
So as a solitary specimen, it's very well adapted for pot culture.
Okay. Now then, we have a group of, now I never know if I'm saying this right, dyckias, but cool terrestrial bromeliads.
Yes, these are from the Brazil area, most of them, and these guys are tough, and they will grow in the shade, in the sun. They'll take water, they'll take drought. They're very floriferous. They have
great colors too.
Great colors. These are the orange ones. They come in yellow. And the real neat thing about dyckias is the foliage color. It comes in reds and maroons and greens and light greens.
Right.
And
you get the blooms like we're looking at now, but you also get these amazing leaves. And often you'll have like a maroon leaf with a silver underside, with, you know, that dusty silver, which is awesome.
Right, and they actually come in silver too. I forgot about that. That's one of the forms that they have, which is a beautiful one to have. And these are just hybrids of species, but just a really tough plant for Austin.
So be on the lookout for these folks, and a great hummingbird plant too.
Yes, wonderful.
I had the pleasure of visiting with my first hummingbird of the season yesterday. It's a little nectar dusted beak. It was really quite cool, and the more that we can attract them into the garden, the better. So that's something to be on the lookout for. Great for rock gardens. Great, as you said too, sun or shade for these plants.
Not real deep shade, but you know, filtered under an oak tree kind of shade. Dry shade. Yes.
Yeah,
and most of these will do well under dry shade once they're established.
All right. Well, we have a dioon as well, and people are familiar with sago palms. They understand the cousins of this particular plant family. But these are actually, even the dioons are more cold hardy than the sagos, aren't they?
Some of the species are more cold hardy. The real advantage to the dioon is they look like they belong here. They're from Mexico, and they are very drought tolerant, very acceptable of water, and they can take actually deep shade or sun. Unfortunately, we are becoming a state that's getting cycad scale, and that's becoming a problem in Texas. And dioons are one of the plants that cycad scale does not attack. So
that is very good news for me.
This is, you know, for all those people who have sago palms and have had problems, this would be your replacement plant for those.
Wow.
They're not as quite a trunk-forming palm or cycad, but they definitely have the similar foliage.
Beautiful plant, and I am crazy about mine, and there's some blue forms of this as well. We're going to have to wrap it up, Patrick, but people can be in touch with you. You're a garden designer.
Yes, sir.
Have a website, and the website real briefly.
It's khsgardendesigns.com.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure visiting with you. Great selection of plants. And again, folks, don't despair if you have shade. You can have all these cool species growing in your gardens as well. Again, our pleasure having you back on Central Texas Gardener. Coming up next, it's our friend Skip Richter.
Hello and welcome to Down to Earth. You know, we've been not bagging our lawns for quite a while now. A number of years ago, we returned to the old way of returning the clippings to the lawn because clippings feed the lawn and improve it. Well, this week's question is about returning clippings to a lawn when it's diseased. And the question is, isn't that a problem because you're putting those diseased clippings back into the lawn? Well, the fact is that it's not a problem. Even with diseases like take-all patch, which are very serious on our lawns, in fact kill lawns, or some of the other leaf spot diseases, it just doesn't add to the problem in any significant way. Those diseases are somewhat, I guess we could say they're ubiquitous in that even if you don't have the disease in your lawn, you can get it. Spores float through the air and there's other ways they come in. So there's no problem with returning those clippings. In fact, the clippings are so tender and succulent that they decompose quite rapidly during our warm summer weather. So continue to return your clippings. In fact, they'll help the lawn. What they do is they cover the surface, they help reduce weed competition, and in a diseased lawn, one of the things that happens is we start to see more weeds because as the lawn gets thinner, you start to have weeds coming through. So go ahead and return the clippings. Don't worry about that. There's other ways of managing the disease and keeping a healthy lawn. The clippings are of no concern. In fact, they're a benefit. This week's featured plant is Thryallis. Thryallis is one of my favorite plants that's starting to become fairly widespread now throughout the Central Texas area. Thryallis has a nice benefit of being somewhat deer resistant. The beautiful yellow blooms start in the spring and continue on through summer and really on into fall until we get a good frost on the plant. It's fairly cold hardy. It does quite well in the Austin area and a little bit north of here. It can be sheared into a shrub type shape if you want. Some people plant them and shear them quite low. Others let them get large. They'll get up to about 5 or 6 feet eventually if they are growing in good soil conditions. Thryallis is one of those plants that doesn't have disease and insect problems and ought to be planted more. It likes full sun, but it'll grow in some shade. So if you've got a fairly shady area that has decent bright light, or in other words, plenty of foot candles of light, you might try it, and I think it'll do okay for you there as well. Out in the garden, it's time to continue to trim up those spring things that were starting to look a little bit like they're sagging for the summer, and that would include the bulbs, for example, that have foliage that's turning yellow and starting to die down. Some of the spring bloomers that look great when the weather's cool now aren't looking so good. So trim those off, put some mulch around them, they'll disappear and they'll be back again for the rest of the cool season this coming winter and then next spring to bloom again. You want to avoid any broadleaf weed killer at this point in time. We've said it before, but once the weather warms up to 85 degrees, some of the broadleaf weed killers in the lawn can do damage to the turf, and we want to avoid those or you'll just be setting yourself up for problems down the line. Warm season vegetables and flowers can all be planted now. Continue to plant those in the garden, and as you do, put a mulch down. Mulch helps hold soil moisture. It prevents the soil from eroding away or from crusting, and as you plant, putting a mulch around the plants is like gaining an extra doubling on your watering. Every time you water a plant that's not mulched, you're watering twice as often probably as a plant that's been mulched, and that varies with soil conditions, but mulch is very helpful to our plants. If there are any spring bloomers that you haven't pruned, go ahead and prune those now. Those are the plants that bloom only in the spring. We need to make sure and get those trimmed up so they can regrow and be ready for next spring's show. So don't delay any longer on those. For more plant tips, or if you'd like to contact the Extension office in your county, visit the website klru.org/CTG.
Thanks, Skip. Now let's check in with Trisha Shirey for Backyard Basics.
The Did you know that you can eat a lot of the flowers that you grow in your garden? Of course, you do want to know for sure if they're the right variety and that they are not poisonous. And I'll have a list of both edible and poisonous flowers for you on the Central Texas Gardener website under Trisha's Corner, so be sure to check that out. You do want to make sure that your flowers are grown organically also if you're going to be eating them, so be cautious about using flowers from a florist or a nursery or garden center. Also, I would be careful about picking them along roadsides in case there are chemical contaminants. Young children shouldn't eat flowers, and if you have a lot of allergies, you may want to avoid eating flowers as well. Now, with the various flowers, there are different parts of the plants that you'll use, and on the website you'll find more information about the individual flowers and what parts to use of them. But here are a few examples. Now, the artichoke, of course, is a flower that we eat. Things like sage, pineapple sage, basil flowers, lavender. You're just eating the buds of the lavender, as well as roses and scented geranium flowers, chive flowers, society garlic. All of those are wonderful edible flowers. And there are a couple of tricks to preparing them so that they stay nice and fresh. Now, one thing you can do is give them a quick rinse, dry them well, and then put them in a container on damp paper towels, and you can layer them or just put a bunch of them and put a paper towel underneath and seal that up, put that in the refrigerator, and they'll keep for several days like that, and they'll stay nice and crisp and hydrated, so you can decorate a cake or use them as garnish, as I've done in some of these dishes here. You can also cut them, and for things like pansies especially, I like to cut a bit of the stem and make sure I've got that, and that keeps them nicely hydrated, so when I'm ready to make nasturtium sandwich with a nasturtium leaf and herb butter, I can just put that flower on. It'll stay nice and fresh through my garden tea. Now, things like calendula also can be used, but we're not using the center part of the flower. You're just really using those petals on the outside. So you can take a pair of scissors and just trim those and add them to a salad. And same thing with pinks or dianthus. You don't want to use that white base of the petals. It tends to be a bit bitter. So that's the case with many flowers. Roses are the same. The base at the bottom of the petal is white, and it tends to be tough and kind of bitter. So I like to just take my scissors and do a little trimming and add that to your dish. And the roses give wonderful color to things as well. This is a flavored vodka, and I've used lemon flowers, just flowers off of my lemon tree, and I have rose petals, and the rose petals have given it a really nice pink color. You soak the flowers in the vodka for about 48 to 72 hours in a warm place, and then strain it, chill it, and it's really wonderful for sipping. And then here is a wonderful salad, just lots of fresh greens, and then it has the nasturtiums, the nasturtium leaves, the chive blossoms. And with the chives, I like to just pick those flowers apart and sprinkle them on as garnish. I did put chive flowers in the herb butter, or you can eat the whole flower too. They taste kind of like a hot radish. Some of these flowers are very sweet, some are peppery, some are spicy, and individual flowers sometimes have a very different flavor depending on the color. Sometimes pansies, the yellow pansies and then the dark purple and blues taste better than others. So taste the flowers before you use them and make sure that the flavor is good. It's the same thing with roses. Some roses taste better than others. Now here are some deviled eggs. It's one of my favorite things to do with flowers. I'd actually chop up calendulas and rose petals, nasturtiums, chive flowers in the deviled eggs, and then just sprinkle it all over with flower petals and top it off with a beautiful flower. Wouldn't your guests love to come and try something like that? Kids love to try it too. So next time you're doing a garden party, bring some of the flowers into your food as well as just decorating your table, and I think you'll really impress your friends. There's a wonderful book about using edible flowers, Edible Flowers, Desserts and Drinks by Kathy Wilkinson Barash. So we'll have lots more information and recipes for you on our website.
For more tips, online video, and the blog, check out klru.org/CTG. Next week, Scott Thurman shows off plants for soft sculpture. Until then, I'll see you in the garden.
klru.org/CTG. It's where Central Texas gardeners can find tips, recipes, and anything they may have missed on the show. Keep up with the producer's garden on the new CTG blog and join the conversation by posting your own comments, questions, and garden pictures. klru.org/CTG. Central Texas Gardening Online.
Visit klru.org/CTG to learn more about today's program, upcoming events, and to sign up for our electronic newsletter. Check out John's how-to tips and visit Trisha's Corner for ideas inside and out. Get growing at klru.org/CTG.